What's going on, everybody? John here with Mock Motorsport, and today in our series of getting my BRZ ready for Ontario Time Attack, we are going to be addressing the suspension, more specifically coilovers. Now, if you've been following along, I have purchased the Ohlins Road and Track. Now, not the MI20, but the MP20 kit, which is the new kit which comes with the softer spring rates. Now, they come with a 4K front and a 3K rear, and a lot of people have criticized this for being too soft. Me included. I think once you get an R-comp tire on the vehicle, it's just not going to cut it. So anyways, we're not going to dive too deep into why or what the reasoning is behind why they've done that. The bottom line is a lot of manufacturers, including KW, more specifically the European manufacturers who've been making suspension for this chassis, have really dialed down their spring rates, and it's almost as if they're trying to appease the North American market, in my opinion. I think that the Europeans tend to be a little more driver focused, and they don't mind a little bit of a harsher ride. So KW, Ohlins, the Sachs dampers, all these guys have dropped their spring rates from their initial offering to a much softer rate, and my guess is just to appease more of the road driving people, because let's be honest, the majority of people that own this vehicle are probably doing more street driving than they are track. However, that being said, if you see here behind me, I've got the Ohlins Road and Track. Again, we're doing the MP20 kit. Now, what I've done is, I don't know if you can see this here, but see, because I've changed up, we're going to change it up a bit. So, thanks to IBOC Canada, I've got the IBOC ERS springs. So we've got a 400 pound and a 425 pound. Okay, and with Vorschlag, they were kind enough to supply me with these top camber plates and then the rear mounts that have the spherical bearing in it, so the radial bearing. I'm really excited to try that out. This is just a mock-up, just for me to, just to see kind of the length and free length and all that other good stuff. So in any event, I'm going to start assembling these bad boys, and we're going to put them together and see how this goes. Now, a lot of you are probably saying, hey, I've done my research, and you're upping the spring rate and all this other good stuff. You have to address the dampening, or sorry, the valving and all that good stuff. Yeah, I'm going to be a guinea pig here. To be honest with you, I have no idea how this is going to turn out. I've spoken with both Ohlins here in the U.S., or North America division in the U.S., and I've spoken with a few other expert suspension kind of gurus, and the bottom line is I can't really seem to get a straight answer. The only answer that I was able to get from Ohlins is that their valving is good for a 35% increase, which brings me to approximately a 5 and a 4K. So we're going essentially with like a 7K setup here, so it's going to be significantly stiffer than their 35% overage would allow for. But that being said, I remember back in the day when I used to autocross with my EK and EG Civic, and a lot of guys would just run Coney yellows, Coney adjustable yellows, and then ground control sleeves, and I remember running up to a 400 and 450 pound spring. And the dampers were fine. You would just, all it did was it just really limited your valving. You couldn't really get the full range or the full spectrum. So, I think we're going to be close. Do I think it's probably best that I get them revalved? Absolutely. But I suspect, that there's actually enough threshold within their current valving that's going to allow for these spring rates. Because my guess, and I could be wrong, is that Ohlins didn't actually do too much in terms of the revalving. I think they just changed the spring rates. And the reason I say that, they changed the spring rates and they removed the camber plate and the top hats just to keep it cost effective. Because if you do the math backwards and you work 35% backwards from their initial offering of 343 pounds, you'd be surprised as to what the number works out to. So, is it going to work? I don't know. But hey, we're going to find out. And maybe at the end of the day, I'm going to discover I'm going to get maybe a season out of it. I'm going to have to send it away for a revalve. I don't know. However, if it does work, a lot of you Ohlins Road and Track fans that have been contemplating this kit for your BRZ and 86, you can thank me later. So, let's get assembling. Right, so we're just assembling the fronts here. So the one thing that we want to do is we have to trim the dust boot to length. They would tell you to take out 40 millimeter from the bottom. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to take our spring, our IBOC spring. Now, the springs that come with the kit, they're a 9-inch spring. These are an 8-inch spring. So it's going to take a little bit of finessing and messing around with the measurements just to see how this is going to pan out. And then, of course, as most of you know with the Ohlins kits, the preload on the spring is really important. So what I'm going to do is kind of an initial base setting, is I'm actually going to set the preload to what they recommend for the preload for the softer springs. However, I'm going to take up that inch difference. So the difference in length, I'm going to take up that length and then just adjust it accordingly. So the preload is actually going to be a lot less on these springs, which I think would be about right because they don't require as much preload, being a much stiffer spring. My guess is that Ohlins uses quite a bit of preload. Like for instance here in the front, they're recommending to set the preload, the spring preload, to 32 millimeter. So that's, you know, that's quite a bit of preload onto the spring, onto the spring that they include. Being that this spring is going to be approximately 25 millimeters shorter than the springs that would normally be included, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make up the difference. So I'm going to preload this spring by approximately 7 millimeter. And I'm going to do the same with the rear. So I'm just going to take the difference, the fact that this is 25 millimeters shorter, and see if we can make up the preload that way and see how that goes. So we're going to basically we've taken our eye box spring here, and then we're going to just slide it down into the shaft, onto the base, and then I'm going to get into measuring and double checking my measurements once this is all assembled. And then we're going to take the Vorschlag radial bearing, the top mount here. So you're going to find that you're not actually going to use a lot of the hardware supplied by Ohlins when you're using your own camber plates. Well, I suppose it depends on the camber plate. With the Vorschlag ones, there's really not a whole lot for me to use here. So, alright, so we've got that on. And then we're going to go to what I like to call the pièce de résistance. And that's our top camber plate here. And we're just going to slide that on like so. And then as you can see, we've slid it on. And then we're just going to take this nut and we're going to slide that on and start threading it through. Locate the bearing, of course. And you're going to want to start all of this by hand and basically thread it on by hand. There's no need to get carried away here and crack out the tools just yet. So, and then it's important to always remember we're not using an impact on this or anything like that. Hand tools, you know, that's all you're going to really need in this case. And then of course we're going to torque this once we're all set. So here we are. Alright, so we're just going to go right snug. Alright, so as you can see there, we've snugged that up. Oh. There we go. Now, I recommend once this is all assembled and it's in the vehicle, after driving it for a bit, to just double check and retighten this. Some people have, you know, said, I remember with some of the other camber plates and other suspension designs, they actually recommend putting a little bit of thread locker on the top of this. You know, thread locker is great, it has its place. I'm just not sure if that's necessary. I think that if you're always double checking the torque on here and ensuring that it's tight, I think you'll be okay. So anyway, there we have it. We're essentially assembled. And then again, as I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically move this up. So their recommended installed spring length, okay, is preload is 32 millimeter. The free length is 230, giving 198 installed. So again, we're going to remove the fact that this spring is essentially 25 millimeters shorter. So we're going to remove the difference, and then we're going to preload that accordingly using our provided wrenches. Cool. All right. So effectively, what we want to do is, you know, we want to get a 198 millimeter installed length less the 25 millimeter, because this is, again, it's a shorter spring. So right now we're currently sitting at 205 millimeter. So what we want to do is I want to take this spring and essentially reduce it to 198 millimeter installed. That's my guess. Who knows? Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. So that basically will 198. So yeah, that's going to take us down to, by reducing that, that's going to take us down by 8, give or take 7, 8 millimeter. So as you can see right now, there's no movement in its current setup. So by moving these adjusters, these collars, by 7 or 8 millimeter, that's going to put a slight preload onto the spring. But I don't think it's going to really put enough that it's going to make a remarkable difference either way. So anyways, again, it's all a test at this point. I'm doing it all for your benefit. So wish me luck, and we'll see how this goes. Alright guys, so I've gone ahead and I've installed and assembled the fronts. So we've got our Vorschlag camber plates all installed and torqued down. We've got our Eibach ERS springs, our 400-pound springs in the front. And as I've said, I've adjusted this accordingly. So, you know, according to the guys at Ohlins, they say that your spring length should be 198 millimeter, which I've done. So we're at 198 millimeter right there. And then they say that your shock absorber length, so that's going to be from essentially the spring perch to our collar here, just down at the bottom, should be sitting at 238 millimeter. So I've just double checked that, and yep, we're at 238 millimeter. So there you have it. Now, word of caution, as I've learned, according to Ohlins manual, they tell you to torque this guy here and the corresponding one here to it says in the manual between 30 and 40 newton meter. That seems to be very vague. I mean, it's not very specific. So I set my torque wrench to 35 newton meter, going right in the middle. And as you can see here, this was essentially the end result. So it's a threaded nut, and unfortunately, I broke this hex bolt. So I'm going to have to go to my local hardware store and hope that I can find a replacement. Otherwise, I'm going to be calling Ohlins to get a replacement. But in any event, so we set that all up. There are the fronts. I have to admit, they are a thing of beauty. And yeah, now we're going to move on to the rear. Alright guys, one thing I've discovered in installing the Vorschlag kit with the rear radial bearings is that if you are putting this together, and I'm going to try to explain this as best as possible. So we have the bump stop, and then we have the factory supplied Ohlins washer. Now this has a taper that sits and forms perfectly on the inside of the shaft, so that taper meets. And typically what would happen is your bellows would then sit over this, and you would see the perfectly machined recessed area on this washer. Kind of accommodates the bellows very perfectly. I'll just kind of show you here if I can. So it's supposed to kind of sit like so, and then it basically sits flush. Now here's where my dilemma is. By putting this radial bearing over it, it just kind of moves around. It doesn't actually like sit in, because the bellows kind of creates this space or this void. So if I remove the bellows, and if I just have the washer and the radial bearing, you can see it just fits in there perfect. You can see the machined area just accommodates the inner race of that bearing very well, and it sits nice and flush. So I'm a touch conflicted, because a part of me would like to use the bellows to protect the shaft from, you know, more dust than needs to be there. But I mean, dust is inevitable anyway. So I'm wondering if maybe, rather than using the bellows at the top and cutting it to free length, if I just put it into place and not have it in the top, so to speak. Well, I'm going to play with this and see how this goes. I'll get back to you, but I thought I'd let you know, if you're trying to put it in with this, it just won't accommodate it. I mean, you can just compress it. Essentially, when you squeeze this into place and compress it, it will hold it in place. It's just rubber. But my thought is it'll probably just cut the inside of the rubber there anyway. Alright, so I've assembled one side already, and I'm just going to kind of show you what I have found. I've been able to stop for my Tim's break. So I'm refueled and ready to go here. Okay, so with respect to the rears, when using the Ohlins dampers, the one thing that you're going to want to do is we're going to want to remove the top, the bleeder adjustment, or sorry, the valve adjustment screw. The one thing I did find is that if you crank this down all the way clockwise, it's going to make it a lot easier to tighten to get your Allen screw or your Allen wrench in here when you go to tighten that up. So just a kind of a quick tip. Now, as I mentioned previously, when you cut the bellows according to Ohlins, the way that the bellows sits using the top plates from Vorschlag. Now, this may not be the case for other brands, but for Vorschlag specifically, the way that they've designed this is that the washer that comes on the strut fits perfectly, that little machined edge fits perfectly in the bearing here. When you have the bellows installed, it makes it a lot harder for it to sit accordingly, and my suspicion is that when this is in, and then you have the washer in, and you compress everything, it's just going to pinch the rubber anyway, because it's got to make its way into the race of the bearing. So, what I decided was, they tell you to cut off 92 millimeter of the bellows when putting everything together, and I thought to myself, well, rather than throwing it away, I'm going to keep these ones that you would normally install. I'm going to set them aside just in case I change my setup down the road, that I have them, but normally you would discard this piece. So this piece actually fits really well because it just sits like so on the shock, I should say. It's not going anywhere. Plenty of movement, all right, and because it's got this kind of collar on the bottom that fits perfectly over the shock, it's not going anywhere. So I've installed that. We're going to install our washer. All right. I'm going to grab our Ibach ERS spring. All right. We're going to install that bad boy here into place like so. And we are going to take our cam plates, or sorry, our top mount, place it in here like so, and then you can see that it's got a provision here for this bushing already included with the plate. And we're going to install that like so. Now, I said earlier that you use the nylon locking nut that comes with the Ohlins kit. That was incorrect because spacer, because Vorschlag provides their own nylon locking nuts. So we'll just thread that on there like so, and then tighten everything up. If I can find my tools here. 17 mil here. Get this guy to go in place, like so. I normally work faster than this, guys. Currently doing meal prep and dieting for another show, so I'm a bit calorie and carb depleted. So I'm not working as quickly as I normally would. But in any event, I find this to be the most effective way to tighten this down without making that shock shaft rotate inside. You just use the bench as leverage against the wrench here. And basically we're going to snug that up. Alright. Perfect. So when you're all done, this one is the other side. It's already assembled. We're already ready to go here. As you can see, I've already taken the tension and put the pre-tension onto the spring. I've measured according to Ohlins specs from the top of the plate here to the center bore of this of the lower bolt hole, and I'm well within the specs. There is approximately I want to say about 17 millimeter of tension, pre-tension put onto the spring, as opposed to the 28 preload, 28 millimeter preload that would normally be found in the other spring. So, in any event, there we are, and I'm not going to bore you with the install in the vehicle because I'm sure you guys have all seen plenty of YouTube videos on how to install these. So, there you are. Now, another little tidbit of information. You do not want to forget these collars down here when installing these into the lower control arm. Otherwise, you're going to compress your lower control arm and you're not going to have a good time. So there you have it. Next, we're going to install them. That is our rears. And this is the completed front. As you can see, everything's all assembled. We're all measured up, ready to rock. Just a matter of installing it. Alright guys, so it's late. I've been at this for much longer than I wanted to be, but we're all done and we're all wrapped up here. So I just wanted to show you the final product. I have to admit, whether this works out or not, these are some sexy looking coils. I mean, you know, I'm all about the Ohlins yellow and gold, but man, that Eibach red and the Vorschlag plates, they look pretty great. I have to admit, that red and gold is looking pretty good. But anyway, you know, I would say that the assembly, you know, the instructions that Ohlins provides, this manual, I mean, the packaging is terrific. You know, they give you a lot of cool stuff. You know, the manual is kind of nice. They give you all these, you know, all these decals. They even go as far as to giving you these really come in this special little package, these like emblems that are like adhesive. And I mean, that's cool and all, Ohlins, you know, but when you're paying the kind of money you do, yeah, I guess you'd kind of expect that. I'd prefer if maybe you would maybe spend a little less time on your packaging and improve your owner's manual slightly, and maybe include top mounts again. But in any event, all in all, I'm into this for probably far more than I really should be. I'm just a big fan of the Ohlins coils, and I really wanted to make them work, and I was super disappointed to find out that they had actually lowered the spring rates. So, you know what, I'm the guinea pig here, guys. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I'm really hoping it's actually going to work out to our advantage, and hopefully it'll all work out. And I can't wait to share, you know, the results with you guys, just to let you know how it all works. And hopefully with any luck, you know, the ride quality, and of course when I take it to the track, it's gonna do its job and not gonna run into any issues. And then you guys will all know that you can do the same thing I did without having to go through the trouble, or without having to buy a different setup or revalving and all that other good stuff. That being said, I do want to, you know, say that it's probably a good idea to revalve regardless. But I've got a sneaking suspicion, and I'm not going to share with you just at this point why, but I do have a sneaking suspicion that this the valving is going to be just fine. And if it all works out and the ride quality is hopefully as good as I expect, then I'll tell you why, or I'll kind of lead into why I suspect these dampers are fine with the higher spring rates. But in any event, I really appreciate you tuning in and watching, and I hope that you were able to find this informative and helpful. And as always, like and subscribe. And thanks again, guys, for supporting this channel. I really do appreciate it. See you soon. Because we are using the we are using the Vorschlag mounts. All the hardware is already provided as per Vorschlag. So basically, we're just going to slide this into place like so, and slide it place. Yeah. Yep. I believe. Yeah, not super descriptive, not gonna lie.